The first thing we need to do when working with Angular is include the Angular library in our web page. I've done this by adding a script to our body that links to the Angular source code. Once that's in place, we then need to define our Angular application. We do this by including the ng-app directive in our HTML. In this case, I've included it in the HTML tag. And we assign to it a value that corresponds to the application, or more specifically, the Angular module that we are going to build using the Angular framework. At this point, we don't really need to be too concerned with directives. We'll cover an entire lesson on that later in this course, but we really need to understand that the value we assign to that ng-app directive should correspond to an Angular module. And an Angular module is defined in our JavaScript. It's done by calling the module method of the Angular global object. And that method accepts two parameters. The first parameter is the name of the module, and that name should correspond to the value that we assigned our ng-app directive in HTML. The second parameter is a list of dependencies, and those dependencies are other Angular modules. Some of them may be Angular modules that we've written, or they may be Angular modules that other developers have written and we've included in our web page. An example of this would be, for instance, the ng-animate module. This module allows us to add some animation to our Angular application. Of course, if we use the ng-animate module, we also need to include the source code for that library in our HTML by simply adding another script that links to that source code. Here we see that we first load the Angular library, and then we load the Angular animate library. And that Angular animate library is referred to as ng-animate. The most important thing to get out of this lesson, however, is that in Angular we define a module which encapsulates all of the code in our application. And by code, I mean things like controllers or services or other directives that we will learn how to write in future lessons. But the name of our module should correspond to the value that we gave that ng-app directive in our web page.